right, let's get that out of the way. It does that thing. Rumor has it that someone threw a bucket of water on Henry J, and the little munchkins at Gibson Nashville are now free to make good guitars again. So let's see how they did. This is a 2020 Gibson Original Collection 61 SG Standard 61 with the Maestro Vibrola. It comes in 3 versions. With the Maestro Vibrola, with the sideways Vibrola, avoid those, they're terrible, bad physics. And just a regular stop bar tailpiece, which is probably the one most people are going to want. Being perverse, I wanted the one with all the tuning issues. I'll get into that and all the details. It's also the one I've been looking at for decades and wanting, but finding one that I could afford has always been a problem until now. Let's see if that's actually correct. How does this hold up to the 64s, 63s? This is much more like a 63, 64 than a 61. I've played a lot of the real deals. I've played a lot of nice Gibsons. I've played a lot of guitars. You know, going through a 78 2204 Marshall that I restored and recapped. In the actual playing video, which will be part 2 of this, you're going to hear this in more detail. There's a 62 AC15 here that I'm going to throw in the mix. You'll get a real sense for what this guitar can sound like. But for now, we're just going to stay with this semi-dirty 2204, and I'm going to show what the pickups sound like and what the guitar in general is. There's going to be a lot of detail coming up, but let's start off with an overview. It is a really pretty looking guitar. They've got the finish really nice. It's one-piece mahogany body. They've got the headstock angle correct. The neck angle seems good. Like all Gibson SGs, it can the neck can be a little bit floppy on bends, but that's also because the Vibrola moves a little bit. If you get the stop tailpiece, it won't be as much of an issue. And it's not as bad as I've heard on SGs. I've heard SGs and some other brands, especially mahogany necks, that really drop a lot. And my Strats do too, because I've got them set up to float. 335 typically won't do that. Most Les Pauls won't do that. But a lot of guitars with mahogany necks do. I just want to get that out of the way. Something to look for if you need to do a lot of double stops. In terms of the volume and tones, they're making a big deal now about 500K audio taper, which is not news to the rest of us who do this. But it is pretty much an admission that they've been messing up for the past couple of decades with 300K linear taper pots. I even got into an argument with the VP at Gibson Memphis back when that was a thing. And I said, you know that people buy your guitars with those stupid 300K pots and they promptly take them to guys like me to put real pots in them. And he said, well, our studies have shown that people prefer the 300K linear and that is the optimal choice for blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm still here and he's gone. And they've gone to 500K audio taper pots, which is correct. They've not gone to the 50s wiring, which technically is correct for this model, though I do prefer it. That's another subject. They're making a big deal about using orange drop caps. An actual early 60s SG would have had ceramic disc caps anyway, but orange drops are fine. I'll show you that in the details. But in terms of the volume tapers, pretty much like any Gibson style guitar with 500K audio taper pots that are wired correctly. There's a little bit of treble loss as you turn the volume down because they don't have a bleeder cap and they've not done the 50s, but the loss is not great. The loss is much less than it was when they were using the 300K pots. That's down to how the impedance loads down the pickup. That's for another video. For right now, I'll just say that these things work, and they work pretty much the way that they would on an actual 64. Now, same for the neck. Side note, these things have a really nice resonant peak to them. These are the Burstbucker 61 R&T, which they're claiming sounds like a T-top, which would not be actually 61, it's a 64 anyway. But, and you know, 61 PAFs and the later patent number pickups are all over the map in terms of what they sound like. These are within that area. But if you want to do the Clapton woman tone thing, I'll show that in the real playing video. But they've got a real nice resonant peak to them. These pickups are bright. But no one says you have to keep everything on 10. So let's turn the tones down to about 7.5 each, and back the volume off to about 9 each. Control there, and it's not unique to this model, but it's something that the stock Gibsons for a long time have been getting in the way of, and now they're letting you use the controls on a SG or Les Paul or 335 the way they're supposed to be used. Joe Bonamassa approves that message. I wish I could play like him. He's not here. I'll have to do it for today. The other thing to show you is that if you're using both pickups together and roll one off, the volume goes away. That's normal. You can have that change to the modern wiring. I don't care for the modern wiring. I like this much better in terms of how the pickup resonant peaks behave. Again, I don't want to go too deep into technicals. So I'm leaving the tones at 8 and the volume's about 8.5. And I'm just going to show you some clean chord stuff. Neck, middle, bridge. Bridge again, rolling down just a little bit. A lot of control there, and you know, I'm not going to show this in this video, but if you were to set your amp up for an amp overdrive and you set it so that, all right, about 3 or 4 is my clean. About 7 is my rhythm. And then 10 is my lead. Then the amp will do all the work. This 2204 on this setting won't show that. If you do 50s mods, then you can make it so that as you turn down, it gets brighter for a nice bright clean, and you turn it as you increase the volume, you get the tone circuit working more, so you can get a fat lead, a warm rhythm, and a bright clean without a single stop box. But I digress. So I'm going to show one more thing. Actually, I'm going to show that after all the details. So let's go through all the detailed stuff next. And remember that the second part of this video will have more actual playing, different sounds dialed in, different amps, and different playing styles. So let's go through all the detailed stuff and get back at the end of that. Okay, the pickguard does not match the shape of the old ones or the bevel of the old ones, and that's almost nonsense. You can buy the pickguard that more closely follows the curve here. I'm sure that Gibson did this on purpose so they could see really fast if something was a historic or a standard. But on the old ones and the historics, the guard is a little bit bigger here and follows this curve more accurately. I think this looks fine, unless I find 50 bucks burning a hole in my pocket and just have to have everything just so. It's a pickguard, looks cool, does what it's supposed to do. It's 5-ply, it's not the same bevel, who cares? No one's listening to you play with calipers. Hope to God not. As far as the knobs and pots and all that go, it's pretty good. The text on the rhythm treble is not quite on the same angle that's visible to the player as 10, and the volume tone print does not have the same relationship to the 10 on the dial on each one. These three are fairly consistent. This one's an odd man out. These are not the best knobs. They're fine. That's matters if you're actually reading volume, tone. How often you do that? 10 matters more than that. They're fine. They're on CTS pots. Audio taper. We'll look at that more closely. We'll look at the wiring later. So the thing I don't like about this, it's just a personal preference. I like the pointers, and you get the pointers on the new Les Paul standards, but you don't get the pointers on the new SG standards. So if I keep this guitar, it's easy for me to add the indicator pointers that I like. And there's a world of aftermarket knobs. Switchcraft jack, no surprise, good quality, should be fine. We'll look at the electronics in a minute. When it comes to the pickups, bridge, and tailpiece, I have a few concerns. Some are oddities that can be fixed. Some are normal for production Gibsons. And one thing I'll show you, which only applies to this model with the Vibrola, doesn't apply to the one with the stop bar. It's kind of a problem. Even though the pickup rings are slanted and match the angle of the strings, the pickups themselves really want to stay parallel to the face of the body. So both pickups are closer to the string on the neck side, on the bass side, and well, not the bass side, the neck side, and really resist being pushed down. I've not run into this. Usually a humbucker wants to stay parallel to whatever the surface its screw attachment is on, in this case this angled ring. So I will look into this further. The saddles are not fully notched or notched evenly. The G-string's notch is very shallow. Some of the others are pretty good. That's an easy thing for a tech to clean up those notches, and most techs expect to do that on a newish Gibson. Gibson doesn't do a good job notching their saddles ever. Maybe the custom shop, I don't know. But the notches do line up with the pole pieces, so you have a more or less good straight angle, straight line from where the ball end goes to where it goes at the nut. So that's a minor thing which is common to Gibson. With this Vibrola, you have a shallow angle behind the saddle, which is about that as if you were to wrap over the stop piece on a regular Les Paul or non-trim SG. I don't mind that at all. I like that shallower angle on Les Pauls I've owned in the past where I was able to top wrap. The Vibrola actually works very well with a couple of considerations which I will show you. First of all, the bar is way too tight. It takes a lot of force to bring it out, and then it doesn't want to move back and forth. And so the effort to swing it side to side is the same as effort as to bring it up and down. So I'm going to have to loosen this if I end up keeping this guitar. That tension can be adjusted, but from the factory it's way too tight. Now some of them, this one would just barely clear the knob, some don't at all. And this one does clear here, so it can go back here. So that's good, which is where I'll keep it most of the time, honestly. But I do need to get the tension released on that if I keep this guitar. Something to notice though, and it's common to a lot of these, is if you use the bar, you can see the bridge itself rocks back and forth. Now they did that on the 63s and 64s as well, but on those they had a domed wheel as opposed to these flat wheels. So this does not rock back and forth as well as the old ones. And when they rock back and forth, there's a little bit of binding on the saddle, and that's to be expected. It doesn't throw the tuning off as much on this guitar as I expected, frankly, and as much as it throws off on others that I've seen in videos. And given that rocking back and forth and the saddles not being notched perfectly, if I keep this guitar, I'm not really going to worry about that, because I'm going to replace this bridge with the Tone Pros, which locks in place to the posts, and that'll take that back and forth movement out of the bridge itself. And I'm going to go with the nylon saddles. I could go with the roller saddles, but I find that roller saddles are a new layer of mechanical complexity, whereas nylon saddles, especially the ones they have now, which aren't pure nylon, they're or Graphtec, those more lubricated forgiving saddles, once the bridge doesn't move, this should stay in tune much better. Most of the tuning issues with the well set up SG with Vibrola are at the nut or at the tuners, which we'll get to in a little bit. But if you have the stop bar version of this 61 and you don't have the Vibrola, then this bridge is not going to go anywhere, and it does not go anywhere when you bend strings. So you're left with just the saddle notching, which are always a problem with any new Gibson. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice that this guitar, which is labeled 61, in many ways it's closer to a 63 or 64, does not have a true ABR1. The bridge itself is very much like an ABR1, except that it does not have the retaining wire, which is kind of nice. But instead of being on narrow posts, which are threaded directly into the wood, it's on like a small version of the Nashville. So instead of this going directly coupled into wood through one screw, this has got a post which is screwed into a metal insert, which is inserted into the body. And I don't really have a problem with that. You know, they are trying to get to a price point. This thing has much of the aesthetic of, say, a 63, but it costs nowhere near what a 63 would cost me today. And it actually doesn't cost as much adjusted for inflation as a 63 SG would have cost in 1963. So I think in terms of bang for the buck, that's a fairly smart change to make if that makes it possible to get this guitar, which is otherwise wonderful, to market at the desired price point. So I'm gonna look and see what's going on with the pickups being too high in the front. That's an oddity. If I keep this guitar, I'm gonna get the Tone Pros with the nylon, and I will adjust the tension on this bar. And it's just the tension as it rotates into playing position. The tension as it plays is good. It has a nice bounce to it. It's a nicer feeling to me than a Bigsby. But I should not have to fight to get this bar moved out of the way. So for now, it will just stay back here. All right, like an SG should. It has mahogany neck and body. I know that some of them are two-piece bodies. This one's a one-piece. It's a really pretty piece of wood. I'm really happy to get it. The finish seems a little bit thinner than the ones I've seen from the 60s that have not worn through. They did a much thicker, a little more opaque finish on the ones I've seen. This is very light, I would say. You can kind of see places where the grain, the pores kind of want to affect the surface at certain lights. It's nothing that you can see with the camera. I've tried, and it's nothing you can feel. It's not like the grain's telegraphing through, but I think they're doing a pretty good job with a thin nitro finish on these, or at least not as thick as they did in the 60s. So very happy with that. It's really pretty, and I love looking at pretty wood, and make obvious jokes here. Here's the control cavity in the electronics. You might have noticed in the previous video showing the back of the guitar, there's a slight flake in the finish right on the edge of this control cavity. That's the only cosmetic flaw I can see other than the binding issues I'll get into in just a little bit. And they're also very, very minor. The routing is really clean. Good clean routing. It's not all full of buffing compound and sawdust. This hole is a little bit loose. The screw is a little bit free spinning in it. It's very common with mahogany. It's very soft wood. That's easy to reinforce that, and it becomes stronger than ever. You got 4 500K audio taper pots. They're making a big deal about the marketing, about using those. Basically, they're turning the fact that they have been doing it wrong for so long into a brand new asset of these guitars, that they're finally getting it right, which makes me happy. They're making a big deal about using orange drops. Who cares? 225Ps are fine. If this were an actual 61 to 64 SG, it would have ceramic disc caps anyway. But the 225Ps are good quality caps. I think they're just really saying we're not using the PCBs anymore, which is always a good thing. So in terms of the electronics and the way it's put together, a little excess wire here and there. It's not as neat as I would like. I would give it a B. It's going to be very reliable from what I can see. It should sound fine. It's just not as good as it could be. It's not as good as what you would see in an original example from the 60s, of course. But it's not so far off that if I get this guitar, I would feel the need to take it all out and redo it from scratch. So I guess coming from me, that's a high compliment. As far as the frets and the board go, the frets are a little bit smaller than I was expecting. They're described on the website as jumbos or medium jumbos. I would consider these more mediums. They're a little bit flatter than I would prefer, but they feel fine. They're fairly well dressed. They have the Plex system. I've not found any high frets. I've not found any low frets. I've not found any buzzing frets. They do need to be polished. They're really dull, but that happens. That's fairly easy to do, and I have the ability to do that if I keep this guitar. The rosewood fingerboard is a little bit pale right now because it's fairly dry. I don't see anything wrong with it that lemon oil won't fix. It's not the world's most beautiful rosewood, but it is not the yellow stripy stuff that you get a lot. It's just dried out from, box somewhere. Lemon oil will make that come back to life. The inlays are all done fine. I'm sure it's all CNC. I don't see any real issues with that. There's a little bit of tool marking. Let's see if I can find a spot to show you that. There's some tool marks right in spots like this, but that's just on the plastic binding. There's not too much of it on the rosewood itself. Again, that can be cleaned up. I'm a little bit disappointed in that level of it, but I've certainly seen Gibsons in the past 20 years with a lot more than that. And, you can kind of see little wavy bits. So it's not perfect, but it doesn't affect anything in terms of playability or the feel. Your hand doesn't notice that. But, just want to point that out. The nut is serviceable. It's got a really rough surface with some polishing marks. It's got this line you see here where the lacquer ends. It's kind of odd the way they did that. It's just kind of abrupt, like they just cut it with a knife. The slots are not evenly deep. The G-string's a little tiny bit high. They're not bearing the strings, though I think starting with the G-string, they're a little, it's odd. The G-string is both a little bit high and a little bit buried. I think these plain strings and the D-string need to be a little more exposed. I'm not nuts, no pun intended, about the behind the breakpoint angle on the wound strings. And you can see here, let's see if I can get it to do it. Yeah, there's a little bit of plastic right here that just didn't get trimmed off, and that's just a little bit of the binding right where it goes to that. So that's an easy thing to dress up. Now I had pulled the E string out of here to show you that, and I will say that there's only a slight bit of that pinging when they go in and out. So they're not too tight, though I think they're a little bit tight. Now it said Graphtec nut. This doesn't look or feel like Tusk, so I don't know what's up with that. If I keep this guitar, I will probably get this nut replaced. I'm sure I will. I don't know whether I do bone or Graphtec or Corian or whatever. I will consult with my guitar tech on that. There are limits to what I can do or am set up to do, and so I'm always quick to go to the expertise of others. As far as the headstock goes, it's quite nice. It's smaller than what you'd find on the, say, 63, 64 SGs. It's a little bit wider to my eye than what you'd find on like a 58, 59 Les Paul, but it's a good size and shape, and everything looks very neat. I'm not particularly concerned if the crown inlay is not precisely where it was in 1963 or 61, and I'm not concerned if the bevel angle of the truss rod cover is a little bit off. I will be taking this off to make sure that the truss rod itself is working and has no issues. That'll be a separate thing. These are Kluson style tuners, single ring for the cosmetic look. They're not what Gibson used in the 50s and 60s. They're not what the custom shop puts out, because these are not the little bushings with a much lower profile tuning post. These are a Kluson style that with a screw up top and a little bit more post height, which is fine. The behind the nut angle to this post is quite good on each one. So it's not too much, not too little. There's no buzzing here, and there's no huge tension here that will make tuning a problem once this nut is redone properly. So I can live with this. If I keep this guitar, one of the first things I will do is I will take these strings off and make sure that each one of these nuts is tight using the proper tool for that, the proper socket, so that nothing gets damaged or marred on the finish. But it's really pretty, and for the price, these tuners make sense. So, you know, you're not buying a 61, you're not buying a 63, you're buying something which is very reminiscent and has that vibe and is still a very good guitar. Here's something that's very important, particularly on a used Gibson, but even on this new one. I want to make sure that the truss rod is working right. So I'm marking just with this pencil where the existing position is. I can get right back to that. And I'm not going to do anything radical here. I just want to make sure that the nut turns easily in both directions, that it's not wedged, that there's nothing broken, everything looks great. So this should be a no big deal thing. So I'm going to put the tool in, the proper tool, get it to line up and go in. It's a little bit hard to do with the camera right there. Come on, line up. Sometimes this is the tricky bit. There he goes. All right. So I'm just going to turn it a little bit to the right. Turns easily. Turn it a little bit to the left. Turns easily. All right. I'm going to put that center line right back where it was, because unless I decide to keep this guitar, though I'll tell you, it's looking likely, I don't want to change the action yet. Part of the fun is judging the action as it arrives. I'm satisfied with how the truss rod is. The finish in there is great. I don't see any problems. It turns freely in both directions. Not going to be a problem. But you get in there and you see a whole bunch of thread coming out the end past the nut. The thing's been tightened, tightened, tightened. Especially on a used Gibson. Especially on a Les Paul or SG where the headstock wants to pop off. Either check that yourself or take any new to you Gibson that you buy to a trusted tech to have them check that out before you decide that that is a keeper, because a lot of nightmares can hide under this little plastic bell cover. Okay, welcome back. Now you've seen all the details and my concerns about the nut and the saddles and the bridge moving and the Vibrola. Let me show you exactly how much of a problem that is on this stock guitar as it came to me, as the setup was. So we're gonna get the volume and tone set so it'll be balanced, not too bright, maybe a little bit brighter on the bridge. And we'll do in-between stuff. Now see how, here's before I've used the bar. I'm not used to this bar. The physics of it are different than a Bigsby or a Strat. I had a hard time getting used to the Godot arm after using the Callahan. That's a matter of adjustment. In terms of how much that used right there through the tuning off. So it's there. I started off tuned like Mick Taylor, and I ended up sounding like Brian Jones. And that's kind of cool. I could also do Velvet Undergrounds very easily. So it actually throws it out of tune less than many strats that have not been professionally set up. The pickups have a nice punch. This guitar has got a lot of attitude. It's got a lot of clang. I kind of digging it. It wants to be rude, but you can dial everything back and get a little more polite. Always good to have more on tap than you're using. So I'm really pleased with this. I think it's sounding good. There's that tuning. Stop there before I get shut down by the YouTube police. But yeah, I'm really liking this guitar a lot. It's got some setup tweaks that need to happen, but the core of it is really good. I think the pickups are very promising. I'm going to look into why the angle is a little bit off on those, which will allow me to more fine-tune the balance between them. I find the A is a little bit, response is a little bit weaker on the bridge pickup than I'd like, but like I said, that could be massaged. So, what's my verdict on this guitar? It almost doesn't matter what I think, because I've shown you a lot of details about this, and you're getting a chance to hear what it really sounds like. There's going to be some more stuff in the follow-up video, so you can make your own informed decision. And I would advise you, if you're interested in this model or the model without a vibrola, to go find a few and play them, because there's going to be variation. But having played an awful lot of good guitars, and not expecting this to be as good as an actual 64 for the price that this costs, I'm really knocked out by this. The bigger issues I've had with Gibsons for the past 20 years seem to be either addressed or in the process of being addressed. If I were to make changes to the company, say this must be changed, I would say you've got to get a better fit between the tuner post and the bushing that it receives it in the body. There's just a little bit of slop there. Again, it's in more of a problem with the vibrola. It's not going to be as much of a problem with the stop tailpiece. But if you get that so that that post cannot move in the insert, you're going to have a better sounding, sustaining guitar. That said, this guitar sounds good. I really am not impressed by the stock nut that this comes with. But I've seen a lot worse from Gibson, and I've seen a lot worse from other manufacturers. On the Les Paul series, the 50s and 60s, and this is a side note, the 50s comes with these tuners, the 60s comes with the kidney bean Grovers. I don't like the Grovers, and all the good tops and the Les Pauls are pretty much going to the 60s series. So much prettier tops available on the 60s and the 50s. I think that's a little bit weird. They should make more pretty tops on the 50s, though there are some out there. and make the tuners maybe an option, because I'm pretty sure the hole size is the same for those tuners. These are not the old Clusen with a smaller hole in the headstock. But, you know, I have no real complaints about this guitar. For the price point, I would recommend that if you're in the market for an SG, definitely go play this. Play its non-tremolo version. Play the new modern standard as well, if you want more of a 70s vibe. Something you should know, that if you think you'll get one of these, because you can always take it off and put a stop bar on there, well, that's an expensive thing to do, and there is a hole in the body here where the ground wire comes out for this tailpiece. So if this tailpiece comes off, that hole will be there. Now you can do the Derek Trucks trick of leaving this cover on, even if you take this part of the tremolo off. But there is a hole underneath here. You should know about that. Oh, and weight. This one is particularly light. It weighs 6.9 pounds. So I think this is possibly my lightest guitar. It's really close to my Eric Johnson Strat. The general weight of these that I've seen goes from about 6.5 to almost 8 pounds, with the majority of them being between 7 and 7.5 pounds. So it's very comfortable. If you get the heavier one, odds are it's going to be a little less headstock heavy. But this one, when I have it on a strap, and I've got a strap with a suede back, it doesn't do the neck dive thing. The other version I tried with the Grovers wants to neck dive just because of the weight. So I hope this helps someone. I hope you find this interesting. And I'm going to do a second video showing what this guitar sounds like through some different amps, where the focus is more on the playing than the talking and the information.